Alrighty. Welcome, everyone. Welcome, Judith.
Hello. Thanks for having me.
I'm really excited to be. I feel like I should say thanks for having me because I don't normally get to host these things. Thanks, Mark. So today we're talking about the upcoming concert with the SSO, Beethoven's Ninth, because it's a big year. So it premiered May 7th, 1824 in Vienna, Austria. And it's known as one of the most famous, greatest compositions of all time. What do you think? Do you agree? Do you disagree?
I agree.
You agree?
Yeah, I think we were talking over dinner beforehand about the obsession of we were talking about this 15 minutes ago about the obsession of saying Beethoven is classical, and then after that it's romantic. But I think Beethoven is so special that you cannot categorize this genius. When I listen to his music, I don't think, okay, well, he's a classical composer, and therefore we need to do things exactly like this. And I know there are a lot of like performance practice, which I agree. There at this point now there are certain pieces that I can't imagine done without performance practice. But for some reason, this piece is special. That it should. I feel personally it should just be interpreted however all 200 people on stage, I think, is feeling. Mm-hmm. Like how does this particular piece make you feel? And so, yeah, I think it's a very, very special piece.
Mm-hmm. So in your opinion, what makes this specific symphony so special? Because you spend your life conducting all sorts of symphonies and operas, and what makes this one different?
I think this one, I have all the answers. It's in my head and in my heart. I'm having a really hard time putting it into words. And that's it. I think there's you can't really put into words exactly why this symphony make you feel the way it makes you feel. Certainly the last movement is incredibly famous, and I think I had mentioned to Brittany that I recall as a little child, my grandmother, my late grandmother, who lived to almost 100, and she was in the kitchen preparing dinner in Hong Kong, and she only spoke Cantonese. Right? She was, she had a huge repertoire of Beijing opera, but that's another story. I used to impersonate her, and I got in trouble. But okay, so she didn't speak any other language but Cantonese, and I remember her humming that theme, the Ode to Joy. I mean, what is it about that piece? I know that Beethoven wrote it like in a specific way that everybody can join in, and everybody can sing it. And actually, this morning at 9:15, I was with Monique Martin at Braewood. Is it Braewood Park? Is that
Braewood Park?
Braewood Park, yeah. The school for working with or having fun really with about 250 students between the ages of 5 and 14. And she said, well, just do some workshop with them. And I didn't know what to do. Like, what do you do with 5 to 14-year-old? That's quite a span. And what ended up happening was that we taught the children Ode to Joy. Like, they're 5, and then I said, okay, well, let's just, caution to the wind, let's just do it, right? So I played the piece. I played one line, and then they repeated it. Played the second line. I didn't have to repeat it more than once. They learned it in one go. There is something so special about what Beethoven did with that melody that made it and so accessible in a very beautiful kind of way. So I think that's part of what makes it special. It's something is a work that everybody, the minute you hear it, you remember it forever.
I love that. And I love that you shared a personal story that makes it special to you, like where you can connect that memory. I have a memory of once I was able to drive, Julie and Ezralla would always play it to finish. So the final movement of Beethoven's ninth would finish right at 10 o'clock when her program would end on Sunday morning. And I was usually late driving to church. My parents are sitting there. And I would sit in the car and like wait till it was done. And that was my memory. That's my personal connection to, and I would sing along, usually with the alto part, in German. And then I think my first time that I sang with Greystone Singers, getting to sing with the SSO, that was the work that we did. Was, I believe it was the last time the SSO did Beethoven's Ninth.
Oh my gosh, like the words, right?
Yeah.
I mean, okay, so I mean, we talked about the tune, but the words are unbelievable. Like Zeitumschlungen, Millionen, right? These these are Kuss von ganzem World. Right? I mean, unbelievable. Be embraced. You know, million. I mean, how do you even begin to describe those words? And there's that one particular part where he writes it's hovering up here, and he's talking about there must be the great creator, or there must be some magnificent being that is living over the stars. I mean, that must be where my father lives. I you know, you hear it, the words in combination with the music, and you know, you get kind of choked up, right? And I'm sorry for butchering the German 10 minutes ago. I'm too excited talking about it. Anyway.
How many times in your career have you conducted this? Do you know?
Only once.
Oh, really?
Only once. Because it takes so much, it's massive force and an organization that has all the fabulous energy and to put something like this together. And I think in the case of this situation with the 120 singers from, is it 8 choirs?
10 choirs?
Something.
10. Yeah, she's saying 10.
10.
From choirs.
All over Saskatchewan. I mean, to coordinate that many people and to coordinate that many people with nearly 60 people in the orchestra plus 4 soloists, it is a big endeavor. So it's very special.
So this work became famous because it was this mixture of symphony and oratorio.
Yes.
And Beethoven essentially like doubled the size of the orchestra over his lifetime. He just kept adding more and more and more, right? But I've heard it said when I was doing some prep for this, that Beethoven shouldn't have written for voice, while people like Berlioz said it's the culmination of the author's genius. What do you think? Is it creative genius or half asleep, or is it somewhere in the middle?
You mean, is it creative genius that he put it together? I think is it okay? Is it the first time that symphony has a choral in the back?
It is the first time.
It is.
Yes.
You know, I had a little chat with someone about this earlier today, and we were wondering, like, why and how, and we talked about his deafness, which I think happened at quite early in his life, and it got progressively worse. And so I imagine he was living with all these incredible thoughts in his head, and he cannot hear anything but these incredible thoughts. And it would make sense that by the time he got to that time of his life, it was exactly right that all those ideas and all those colors and all those thoughts and all those words had to come out, and that was the only way that it could come out. And I think if anybody at the time had said to him, "Why don't do it?" I think he would just say, "I'm sorry, I'm doing it. This is exactly how I hear my Ninth Symphony."
Well, it's interesting because we have, like, in Beethoven's sketches, over the course of about 30 years, he was sketching how to set the Schiller poem, which is the On die Freude,
right,
the Ode to Joy,
yes.
right? And it took him about 200 arrangements before he landed on the final.
Yes.
So you knew that he heard it in his head. He didn't have to hear it live.
Right. Yes. He knew exactly what he was doing. And it's interesting because Mozart and Haydn, in contrast, they were they wrote according to what they were hired to do. I mean, but I think what makes this different and what makes this so special was this was really these were all these thoughts and all these ideas that he had to get out. You know, I think that's it's such a special piece. I was actually nervous, like, you know, getting to have to talk about this work because it in symphony there in opera is much easier because there are words that guide you on how fast, how slow, what color. But in symphonic music is challenging because you really there's a you know, you have to come up with the reason why and or a narrative. And a lot of people, you know, they chastise you, musicians, if you dare put a narrative to Beethoven, particularly this work. And I kind of understand, because as I was working on this in preparation, I had different narratives every other week. It changed for me. The more I understood it, the more I had, it also depended on time of day, right? What is going on in my head? Like, how do you pace this work from the whole 70 minutes? And in the end, it just became a collection of really stunning lines. I don't know how but narrative, even though Mark and I was driving Mark crazy, I would like text him, you know, it'd be like 3 a.m. Oh, I think this is what this is about. I think this is what it's about. And I think for a while, can I share? Because it's a little, okay. So I should preface this by saying that I'm not particularly, you know, I mean, religious or anything. I may, you know, every time I hear a beautiful piece of music, I get very religious. Also, every time, anyway, because it just really connects you to something that you can't describe. When I was listening to when I was working through Beethoven 9, I my goodness, like the first movement, I said to Mark, I said, I think this is, to me right now, it's like the Old Testament, right? Because the first movement, the way it sounded like the birth of the universe. There are moments when it's very quiet, you don't know what's going to happen, and all of a sudden the big crashing chord comes in, and it sounds like light, right? So I'm talking about this in a purely, you know, literary kind of way, and all the way through the first movement, the struggle, you can see the land coming up, and you can see the separation of the water, you know, you can see the separation between the sky, the heavens, and the earth. And then you get to the second movement. I thought, well, you know, I think this sounds like, you know, vegetation. Like, it just sounds like an animals, you know, coming into being. And then when you get to the third movement, which I think is the most beautiful movement, first I thought of course it's the Garden of Eden, but then I couldn't find anywhere in the third movement where, you know, all things kind of went wrong, because it is, sorry, it's so beautiful from beginning to end, that to this day, it's still, to this moment, it still stays with me. When you listen to the third movement, it sounds like two people that have known each other for, you know, many years. They're in their 90s, maybe they've been married for like 60 years, and they're sitting there, and it sounds like they're looking back to when they first met, and they're just, just kind of like Strauss's The Four Last Song, the final song, where you're just looking through your entire history of your time together, and it is so beautiful. And then you get, the fourth movement where everybody knows.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we'll get to the fourth movement and talk about that one more, but I do want to talk more about the other three movements. And at the very beginning, if someone didn't know the work and you weren't looking up at the conductor and you're just purely going from sound, it sounds like the work opens with the orchestra trying to tune.
Yes.
What do you think he was like? Do you think he's trying to subvert our expectations? Do you think we're trying to get this gradual build up?
Yeah, interesting. Very interesting question. So he starts with kind of like not a tremolo, but sextuplets in the seconds, and I think is it the seconds of a second violin, and I can't remember a second violin, and I think it could be the cello. And at a rehearsal, I said I want to hear all the ticka 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 ticka, but I don't really want to hear it, which goes exactly with what you're saying. You don't want to give it all away yet, so. And then there are these sustained notes. It just sort of hangs there, and then the first come in. At first, if you were to read the score exactly as written, it would sound like da dun, da dun, da dun, right? And so on Monday night I said, well, try this. If you think of the first two notes from the violins, they're like questions, and that they float. You round the edges of the very quick notes. I said, if you were to play it exactly the way it's written, it would sound jarring. You want it to sound like two gestures that's floating, and then the answer comes in with the violas and the clarinet. The dynamic isn't. Beethoven at no point did he say, well, I want this to be louder or softer. He leaves it open for you to decide. So I think we're not going louder or softer, but we're just doing a different quality of louder and softer. So I think that's the amazing thing about this work. There's so many ways that you can interpret it, and that if you're in the audience and you were to close your eyes, or if all of you were to close your eyes, I don't know, would you have, 50 different interpretation of what it means? Yeah.
It feels like what he's doing at the beginning to me, I always feel it feels like this slow build up to the fourth movement, right?
Yes.
But it feels like it happens very gradually.
Yes.
He doesn't sort of shock us until we get the full choir, 150 voices, or however many we're gonna get.
Yes. It's amazing the way he builds it, and I love in the beginning of the fourth movement, he makes the cello and the double basses play like in a speaking style, right? Da 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 dee dee da dee da 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 da, and so on. And it's interesting. What precedes that is the woodwinds and the brass going, and da, and the symphony da 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 da, and then all of a sudden the sound clears away, and all you hear are the lower strings in response. And you can't help but think, like, if you were listening to it, it's almost like the whole orchestra is like having a total tantrum, like they're just not having it or something. They're just, I don't know, it's like a Tower of Babel or something, freaking out. And the voice, the lower strings come in and say, what is wrong with you? Can you not just calm down? And funny enough, it repeats, and then about 10 minutes later, the same thing happens, and then the bass stands up and says, can exactly that. Can not these harsh sounds, please. This is too much. And then these glorious choir comes in. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, let's talk about the other two movements then, because the typical symphony form that we get, we will hear a faster movement, and then we'll hear a slow movement, and then we'll hear something faster again. Yeah. But he sort of subverts our expectations, and he flips the script a little bit. And in my opinion, I think that the second movement is like it gets forgotten a lot. And I had to even remind myself, like, what does it sound like again? But then he quotes, like, he sort of looks back and he quotes some of his other works. Like he quotes the Hammer Clavier Sonata, the Piano Sonata, and he then he throws in a fugue just because he can.
Yes.
And he sort of changes the typical narrative. Why do you think he started to play with that form?
Yeah, I wonder if he were to do the typical like fast first movement and then slow second movement and then the fast kind of scherzo trio, which is like da 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 before the magnificent end. I think by flipping so you have two fast movements, right? And then the beautiful slow movement, and then shock the heck out of you with the beginning of the last movement. Maybe that's why. Maybe that's why he flipped it in such a way, so that you're very surprised. You're lulled into this, like, this incredible. And then he does talk about Elysium in the final movement, and the third movement really does sound like Elysium. It does. Maybe that's why. I don't know.
It's fun to see if we can get inside Beethoven's brain, because we can't ask him. So
yeah, I know.
So we talk about how Beethoven was, deaf by the time that this one premiered, but he had been writing it for such a long time. Do you think that and this was his largest work? It was the largest symphonic work ever up until that point. And he had the most musicians on stage. Do you think he knew maybe that it was his final opus, or did he just like grand gestures?
I don't know. That's a very good question. I don't know. It would be very interesting to look at composers and track their works and see like how it progresses. I don't know, because he did start a 10th symphony, but it didn't get finished. I don't know why. I never did. Do you know why he didn't finish? I
think because he died.
Oh, okay. There is that. Okay. Sorry. Okay.
But it's interesting because he got more, like his music got larger and more aggressive and more dramatic the older he got, whereas someone like Brahms sort of mellowed out towards the end. His music got really reflective than his early stuff, which was so fiery and passionate. So it is interesting to see like, do they sort of fade out and get reflective? But I feel like Beethoven got a little bit more passionate.
Yeah, I would. It's one thinks of this, like I think individually too. Like some people, as they get older, they get more fiery because they think. I'm going to say what I think, right? And then some people, I think as they get older, they go, yeah, I'm just going to smile indulgently. Yeah, sure, right? I wonder, because in as a musician, I think we change. And I was saying to Mark and Mrs. Turner over dinner that I... doing this for so long, and I still get the butterflies before the first rehearsal. It's like the first day of school. And even though as I've gotten older, like the work has gotten easier because you can anticipate where all the fun issues are going to be. you could predict what people are going to say or the thing, or the things that are going to happen. But so in a way, for me, I've gotten calmer, kind of.
Have you?
I likely not. Well, I'm driving slower. I was I found like in my 20s, I'm embarrassed, right? And so now I'm like, driving, and my partner and I are like, what are people zipping by saying, you just needed to leave like 15 minutes earlier. Like we would be saying these things. It's just so I think it's a very interesting question about Brahms. He got calmer. I think Brahms would be sitting there saying, "What is the rush? You should have, you procrastinated. That's why you're late and speeding." But I think Beethoven would have been speeding all the way.
Yeah.
In a Ferrari, no less.
Well, I want to talk about the fourth movement now, right? This is the one that we all know and love. This is the most famous one. And I read that in 1972, the EU took this as their anthem. And they said, in the universal language of music, this anthem expresses the European ideals of freedom, peace, and solidarity. And it's often cited as one of the most beloved pieces of music, as we've said. And I wonder, is it because of the the personal connection or having heard it so many times, or is it because we've heard it so many times, it becomes one of the most beloved? Because it didn't sort of wane in popularity after the premiere, which music often does.
Yes.
Right? It's actually stayed popular, just like Handel's Messiah, right? It didn't stop getting performed ever.
Yeah.
And so the message of hope that's behind the music, do you think that perhaps it comes from the familiarity, or it comes from sort of the magic of being able to be in the room and hearing that?
I think this work is in a class of its own, and forever will be in a class of its own. And I think this is one of the rare works where you hear it once and you remember it forever. And that this is one of the works that require no effort for you to be completely engaged and sucked right in. And I get chills hearing it, even from my iPhone. Never mind being there live, because how do you describe this work? I was saying to you earlier before we started, so the other McNally chats, I'd always had my list of interesting facts or whatever that I'm ready, but this work, I have very little words to say, but so many feelings about it that I cannot put into words. And maybe that's why that, like this morning, these 5-year-olds, they were singing loudly. How did they know? How did they know this work so easily that you play it for them once on the piano and they were able to repeat it? It's quite remarkable.
It is true that you could turn it on and people will know, oh, that's Beethoven.
Yeah.
Right? Even if they're not, faithful symphony goers or something, we can all sort of connect to that idea. And it is, I don't think that you can listen to the final movement and not feel, it's dubbed like the Ode to Joy, but you can't listen to it without feeling like, oh yeah, like that you feel the joy and the energy.
Yeah. Is I think his genius in okay, so it's in D major, so that's it's a key that as a pianist it fits really well in my hands, and and it's a very singable key. And the way he wrote the melody is, I don't want to say logical because that makes it's perfect. It's, you never think it's too simple, and it's definitely not complicated. It's a perfect melody. So he sets you up with this incredible perfect melody that you listen to it once and you know it, and then he brings in all these other sections that are kind of like derivatives of that first melody, and that are absolute genius. That you almost could, you can see the celestial stars, you can see something so beyond the everyday humanity, like issues of being human. There's something about it that makes you think, I'm here with all these other people, and I for some reason I feel something far greater than my everyday existence. I think, I don't know. I have no words.
Well, I read, and now I think that this is likely folklore, but I thought it was kind of hilarious that Beethoven wanted to conduct the work himself, so that he conducted. I read one that was said he conducted from the wings, and then one that he conducted in front of the conductor. Would that fly in your orchestra? No.
Well, no problem at all. Actually, as a matter of fact, on Monday night, we were talking about the opening, which is, the opening is hard. If you were to really just look at it and go, okay, it just, and okay, da-dun, da-da. And I finally said to them, I said, look, you just have to feel it, right? And sometimes you have to feel, and there's sections in that first movement where I said, I'm not ashamed to say that the principles, you just need to look at each other. Like, I'm going to give you an idea where it's going to be, but you need to look at each other and play together. And your section, and I said to the rest of the section, just look at your principal. Look at where their bow, look at them, breathe, and then it'll be magically together. I said, this is not a moment where you have to look at the conductor, look at the stick, because you'll have 5,000 different interpretation of exactly where that beat is. And I think that's the whole point of rehearsals too, is that you hope that you get to a point by Friday and Saturday that they know it so well that they don't need to look, and I don't need to beat. Because the minute, then it just gets really, it just should just, we do the hard work at the beginning so that it can just exist, especially for this particular piece. I think it's important. So yeah, I did tell them, I said, here, please don't, just look at each other, see me out of the peripheral. So yeah, I have no problem if, nobody watches. Because that is the joke. Nobody watches anyway.
Those memes where it's just like different gestures on the page and there's no music, and they're like, this is what a conductor is doing, and it says left, right. And then there's like one very famous German conductor, and I think the story went, Beethoven 5, right? Da 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 da, right? Which is, every young conductor has to learn how to conduct that, because how do you bring something like that in? And so they asked the musicians. They said, how is it that, like, we're watching the conductor, right? So this is, I think, in the 30s or something. Well, we're watching him, and how do you come in at the same time? Because he just does this. And you just come in miraculously. And the answer was, well, we wait for his hand to stop at the second button of his tuxedo, and then we start playing. And I get it. It's just like, second button of the concertmaster is looking, second button of the tuxedo, and then the concertmaster look at, all their buddies, and they just come in. They just breathe together. And that was part of what we were talking about this morning with the kids. I said, isn't it miraculous how you all were able to do this at the same time? And so we talked about breathing. I said, if you all breathe at the same time,
you'll just come in. You won't even need to look at the person up at the front. Just breathe together. So
I do think your job is pretty important, though.
well, I always joke that if things go well, it's the orchestra. If things go bad, the concentric circle's on my back, and that's okay. I don't mind.
Well, before we got going, you and I were talking about sort of etiquette around applause. And there's this practice in a lot of classical music that you don't applaud between movements, right? But when this piece was premiered, there were 5 standing ovations in the middle of movements, not just at the end or in between movements, but like in the middle while it was happening. What are your thoughts on sort of that visceral response that sometimes audience, and especially like I know for sure that there are a lot of kids that are coming to this concert, which is awesome, right? You want a young audience. And what are sort of your thoughts on how this piece makes us react physically with excitement?
I fully embrace, and I don't care if I get canceled for this, fully embrace applause anytime. Because truthfully, on the stage, like we are working so hard, like we're focused, like we're concentrating, like so every single one of your musicians are just working so hard for you that really at the end of a movement, if they start applauding, I can't tell you how happy we are. Because if a symphony is say 70 minutes long and we're working our guts out and playing with our hearts out, and we don't get to find out until 70 minutes later whether you liked it or not, brutal. So, but the awkward thing is like I'm dying to turn around and say thank you, but I can't, right? Etiquette says I have to stand there, believe me, if there is applause, I'm always smiling. Even though my back is rudely to the audience. Interesting you brought up about Beethoven being deaf and conducting. Apparently, one of the stories is that they were applauding so wildly. Okay, so I think it was at the end of the second movement, and the music's already stopped, and he still got the music in his head, and he's still conducting, right? And then there was this thunderous applause, and he couldn't hear it. And so it was a soprano who tugged his sleeve and got him to turn around. So yes, absolutely. If you like it, please applaud.
I remember being at an Ottawa Symphony Orchestra concert, and the theater that they perform in, you can get seats. Sort of, they're the ones that if they're sold out, they'll open up, and they face the audience. But you can see, I like those seats because you can see the conductor and you can see the musicians' reactions. And I remember watching Janice Saylor conduct, and they were applauding in between movements because it was really fantastic. And she just stood there and she was just kind of laughing, and she was like, because but you're not allowed to turn around, right? But there were, and this was a concert where there were so many young people in the audience that it was like you just felt the energy. Yeah.
I mean, why not? Like why should we straitjacket everyone into behaving exactly, and then we cry and say, oh, why is popular music doing so well, and why are they selling out stadiums? Well, because you're letting people react. Like, why not? If you like it, and actually also back in like Mozart's days, like they would applaud and force the orchestra to repeat an aria because it was so good. I mean, I guess today
they would also bring boxes of tomatoes.
That works too. There's nothing like honesty, right? Goes both ways.
Well, before we get to any questions from the folks online or the folks here, I thought we could close with some superlatives because I thought it would be fun.
Oh, okay.
So which movement is the low-key MVP?
Low-key MPV.
MVP.
And most valuable player?
Yeah. Because the obvious answer is the fourth.
Aha.
Right? But what's the one that you're like, actually, this one does a lot of work?
Okay. I think the third movement. The third movement is deceptive. We were talking about this, the orchestra and I, the rehearsal. I said, forgive me. I said, at this point, I know you all know it. I know you all played it before, but I'm going to count out loud to get us through this transition from the 4/4 into the 3/4, because Beethoven adjusts the what you think is the beginning of the melody just by half a beat, and it is stunning. It makes it sound so normal and natural the way he does it. But when you sit there and you try and count it, it's like just don't count it. Just accept it for what it is. And I he really was. I mean, never mind genius, but about before his time. Right, to just do that and just do it so naturally. I said we're going to have to really just for today's rehearsal not entirely enjoy ourselves and just sit here and count this transition, because if we get lost, we're never going to know where the second beat is, and then you're not going to be able to do that gorgeous pizzicato right there at the height of the line. Okay.
Which movement is most likely to be forgotten?
I think we differ in, I would say, the first movement. I know you think the second movement. Yeah.
The first movement. Movement most likely to be used in a commercial.
Oh, except for the fourth.
Except for the fourth, yeah. That's already been done.
I think the second movement, the fast one, could sell anything. It could sell cars. It could sell cleaning products, because it's so exact, right? I can just see Mr. Clean, right? And maybe
the scrubbing bubbles characters are,
yeah, exactly. Like and I think I love music that sounds like you're in a car commercial going down Highway 1. With the curves or any kind of coastal highway. But the third movement is just a little too slow to sell an Audi. Maybe a Mercedes. Maybe, but not an Audi.
Which movement would you listen to on a desert island?
Oh, that's hard. That's difficult. I don't know why I keep going back to well, you know what? It's hard. It's toss up. I mean, I love the first. The first really is like this monumental, like 16 minutes of sheer, like the universe is like the universe is being mapped out in front of you. It's incredible. The second movement has the most stunning trio in the middle. Mm-hmm. And the third movement is like the most gorgeous piece of puzzle that's put together. And I think the third movement, because the third movement somehow makes you think, but in a very nostalgic and heartfelt kind of way. So I suppose if I was stuck on a deserted island, maybe that one.
The movement that would get voted off the island first.
Oh gosh, that's really hard. I know, because like they're all so great. I
keep all of them?
I would keep them all.
They're all winners.
I would vote myself off the island first before I vote any of those movements off.
And then I think I know your answer to this one, but the movement most likely to be considered the GOAT, the greatest of all time.
I think the first movement.
Oh.
Yeah, because
Not the fourth.
I wasn't allowed to choose a fourth.
That was just the first question.
Oh, just the first question. Oh, I didn't know that. Then I'm.
You take it back.
I take it back. Well, okay. Then if I was on the deserted island, I have to say the fourth, because it is. It's so incredible. I mean, it makes you question your place in the universe, like that it makes you feel this small and at the same time this big. That is the power of the fourth movement. It brings back, it makes you think about possibilities in the future, yet it still at the same time makes you think about, the good and the bad of the past. I think that the fourth movement is genius.
It's the GOAT.
Mm-hmm.
So from the chat, you recently posted online about how you think of the people in the...
Good evening, McNally Robinson Booksellers.
Sorry.
And the restaurant will close in just under 15 minutes.
Okay.
That's just under 15 minutes. We'll be locking the doors. If you have any final purchases to make, or food to eat, or drinks to drink, please do so now.
I think that's our cue that we need to wrap this
Yeah,
up
we need
pretty
to wrap it
quickly
up.
so that
Okay.
we can,
Then we're not going to get locked in.
Yeah.
That's my dream, actually, to get locked,
in a bookstore.
It really is. It is.
So you recently posted online about how you think of the people in the orchestra instead of their instruments when studying the score. How does that change how you approach a piece?
That's one of the thing about Beethoven 9 is that it is best done with friends, I think. And in the last 3 years, I've been so lucky to have had the chance to work with these wonderful colleagues. I think this is my 8th time, and come to Saskatoon, which I just absolutely adore. I look forward to coming to Saskatoon all the time.
Me too.
Yeah, right, yeah. And the beautiful thing, I think, in making music and making music repeatedly with people, that each time, because when you make music with someone, it's almost like you get to know this other part of them. And sometimes musicians don't, or artists don't really open themselves up except when they are making their art. And that's probably why they are artists in the first place, because that's the one place where they can really fully just be themselves. And so I'm so happy I get to make this music with these wonderful colleagues of mine that I've grown to really adore. And so when I'm looking at the score, I no longer see, the oboe comes in. It's like, Aaron, I can hear Aaron's like sound. I can hear Aaron's going to play this. Oh, wow, Margaret's coming in. Oh my goodness, and Gilles going to join her. I could hear, like Brenda's coming in. And there's Joey. And, you actually hear the sound of your colleagues and the sections, like Michael's section, Oksana's section, Jim's, and now Troy, or your new principal bass, and Joel, and then and even like and the percussion, like Daryl. I can hear Daryl play, and that's it. We didn't mention the second movement. I consider that a timpani concerto. Yeah, it's all about Daryl. Can't wait.
So for our last question, this one's also from the chat. You've worked all over the world with all kinds of organizations. What's the same about making music no matter where you go?
Oh, that's a very good question. That's very good. I think it partially the same answer I'm going to give as the last question you asked. It's so special to be able to do this with human beings, with other human beings, and real live people, with instruments that don't plug in, in situations where anything can happen, that even a mistake is a beautiful thing. And that I think is universal. And so I've worked in countries where I couldn't speak the language, but it didn't matter. It never did matter. Like in wonderful orchestra and Warsaw, and then the Korean Symphony. I can only say 2 things in Korean, and probably they were too polite to tell me that my diction was really bad. But it's like I think maybe it comes down to moving with my family from Hong Kong, and all of a sudden having to operate my entire life in a new language, in English. And the one thing that still was tangible and connected was music and art, because that's still a language of its own. And that's what I think is wonderful about, working in music, because no matter where you go anywhere in the world, you speak the same language.
Thank you. That's so great. Are there any questions from the folks here? We don't have time for that. All right. Well, thank you so much, Judith. This
Thank
was a
you.
pleasure, and we hope to see you all there on Saturday.
Thank you.